Hi, it's Nicole. I had a good reading month and managed most of the things I mentioned in my planning video. The highlight is 100% the Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton. I know, I'm very surprised about this as well. If you are a keen reader, I highly recommend How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. And for Victober, I read The Mayor of Casterbridge by Thomas Hardy, What Maisie Knew by Henry James, and a few short stories by various authors from these two collections, The Golden Age of British Short Story and The Nightingale and the Rose. This is a bilingual Chinese-English bilingual edition. I also read The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde as well, and I watched this in the theatre too. I'll put timestamps in so you can jump to the titles you're interested in or just make a cup of tea and sit back. One book I devoured this month is How to Read Literature Like a Professor by Thomas C. Foster. It has 27 very educational and highly entertaining chapters. The purpose of the book, like the author says, is to solve a communication problem. Like in a classroom, the professor says, the story means this, and the students say, did you just make it up? How did you come to that conclusion? I like how he explains things plainly and genuinely wants me to understand. He neither overestimates or underestimates my intelligence. Some professors, wittingly or unwittingly, hopefully the latter, make me feel stupid. They might be excellent, genius in their academic field, but they are rubbish communicators. Foster is an excellent communicator and teacher. Reading his book felt like having my eyes opened and I started to see things for the first time. Those things have always been there, but now Foster has pointed them out and even better explained to me where to look and what to look for when I venture out into the literature world on my own. However, there is a small price to pay. To use a probably not very appropriate analogy, after eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, meaning after reading this book, I now can see things in the stories that I didn't see before, or to put it another way, I cannot unsee some of the things that I was blissfully ignorant of. I will give you an example when we get to a short story by D.H. Lawrence in a few minutes. The book mentions D.H. Lawrence a lot. It also mentions a few authors I happen to be reading this month, G.K. Chesterton, Oscar Wilde, and Thomas Hardy, for example. That made the book extra relevant this month. But just generally speaking, I've been reading all of the following books in light of what I learned here. I have to thank one of you, B. Hart, for bringing this marvelous book to my attention by recommending another book by the same author called How to Read Poetry Like a Professor. I downloaded and read the Kindle sample immediately and it sounded great. And then I noticed How to Read Literature Like a Professor. So I decided to read this one first, just in case it covers general principles that concerns poetry as well. I think that was the right decision. It does cover some poetry stuff. And since then, Autumn told me about a third book by the same author called How to Read Novels Like a Professor. It also sounded great, judging by her description and explanation. So thank you both very much. I was worried in my planning video that I wouldn't get on with The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton because the narrative style was not the most accessible. I can now confirm, no, the narrative style was not the most straightforward, but it didn't stop me loving the story. People who know me a little bit don't greet me with, how are you doing, Nicole? They say, what have you been reading, Nicole? And they can just drink tea and nod. This is the book I've been telling everybody about. I haven't read such a playful, hilarious and original novel for a long time. I say playful first. Mr. Nate Morganlock. Not sure if you've read this one, but I think you'd approve. I think Thomas C. Foster would also approve because at the very end of How to Read literature like a professor. His parting words are, "Your reading should be fun. We only call them literary works. Really though, it's all a form of play. So play, dear reader, play." It's likely there is a social or political message for his 1904 readers that I haven't deciphered, but even just the surface level reading what the story is about is enough for me. I can't decide what to do for you. On one hand, it's such a underappreciated little gem. I want to tell you all about it. But on the other hand, it's much better if you know nothing about it and just give it a go yourself. I think I will do this as a compromise. I will read you a paragraph from his autobiography about how the idea of the novel first came to him. It does not spoil the story, but when you do read the novel, you will recognize things from this paragraph I'm going to read to you now. "I was one day wandering about the streets in that part of North Kensington, telling myself stories of feudal sallies and sieges in the manner of Walter Scott, and vaguely trying to apply them to the wilderness of bricks and mortar around me. I felt that London was already too large and loose a thing to be a city in the sense of a citadel. It seemed to me even larger and looser than the British Empire. And something irrationally arrested and pleased my eye about the look of one small block of little lighted shops, and I amused myself with the supposition that these alone were to be preserved and defended, like a hamlet in a desert. I found it quite exciting to count them and perceive that they contained the essentials of a civilization: a chemist's shop, a bookshop, a provision merchant for food and public house for drink. Lastly, to my great delight, there was also an old curiosity shop, bristling with swords and halberds, manifestly intended to arm the guard that was to fight for the sacred street. I wondered vaguely what they would attack, or whither they would advance. And looking up, I saw grey with distance, but still seemingly immense in altitude, the tower of the waterworks, close to the street where I was born. It suddenly occurred to me that capturing the waterworks might really mean the military stroke of flooding the valley, and with that torrent and cataract of visionary waters, the first fantastic notion of a tale called The Napoleon of Notting Hill rushed over my mind. Let's get non-Victoria stuff out of the way in one go. Lady Jane Grey, 9-Day Queen of England, is an excellent biography of Lady Jane Grey's life by Faith Cook. Lady Jane Grey was a Tudor queen you might never heard of. In the will of Henry VIII, Jane was the fourth in line to the throne after Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. By the will of Edward, she became the Queen of England after he died, and by the will of Mary, she also became the subject of this painting portraying the end of her short life. She was only 17 when she was executed because of her royal blood and the threat it posed to Mary. It's well written, fast-paced, and not dry at all. I recommend it if you know all about Henry VIII and his wives and would like to read something else in the Tudor history. The Mayor of Casterbridge is the Victoria group read. It's about Michael Henchard's tragic life story in a town called Casterbridge in Hardy's favourite Wessex. I made a video specifically talking about Henchard's relationship with his wife Susan, with his friend Farfrae, which mirrors a little bit of Saul and King David in the Old Testament in the Bible, and with his daughter Elizabeth Jane. I won't repeat myself here. I did it full justice. I didn't read any introductions or any blurbs, so I had absolutely no idea what the story was going to be about, because I had learned my lesson from spoiling Far From the Madding Crowd last time spectacularly. Judging from your comments, I had quite a authentic and typical Hardy reading experience. It's extremely sad, very tragic. A lot of you mentioned Tess, which sounded even more tragic. I think I will wait a year or so to read my next Hardy. I feel like his works need to be administered in small doses. In my planning video, I said I wasn't sure if What Maisie Knew by Henry James was a coming-of-age story. I can now confidently say yes, it is, although we don't follow Maisie over many years, all the way till she's an adult. It's a very sad story about Maisie's unfortunate childhood. Her divorced parents were well-off aristocrats, but were extremely selfish. They didn't care one bit about their only daughter, Maisie. There was a court case at the beginning of the novel trying to decide who Maisie should live with. Both parents wouldn't give her up, and she ended up living for 6 months with each. But they did that not because they love her too much to let her go. Henry James explicitly explains. What was clear to any spectator was that the only link binding her to either parent was this lamentable fact of her being a ready vessel for bitterness, a deep little porcelain cup in which biting acids could be mixed. They had wanted her not for any good they could do her, but for the harm they could with her unconscious aid to each other. Even though her both parents were alive, by the end of the novel, Maisie practically became an orphan, living on the charity of a stranger, and for all we know, might end up living in the streets. In terms of writing style, Henry James' sentences are very dense and long. I'll read you a small example. This is the beginning of chapter 1. The child was provided for, but the new arrangement was inevitably confounding to a young intelligence intensely aware that something had happened which must matter a good deal, and looking anxiously out for the effects of so great a cause. It was to be the fate of this patient little girl to see much more than she at first understood, but also even at first to understand much more than any little girl, however patient, had perhaps ever understood before. There are only 2 full stops in this paragraph. They are beautiful sentences, but they are too long and too dense for me to follow. I feel like Henry James has 2 modes of writing. One is for extra intelligent people who have a perfect command of English grammar, and the other is for ordinary people like me. I missed a lot of the happenings and subtleties in those long sentences and paragraphs of the first kind, but I did enjoy the dialogues and the passages of the second kind. I shared my experience reading The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde and watching the show in theatre in a previous video. A lot of you loved the play. I was actually quite surprised how many of you left comments to say you loved this play and this was one of your favorite plays. Marina is actually going to watch exactly the same production by the same theatre company around now, which is very exciting. Thanks for letting me know, and do let us know how you went. I read a few short stories this month, some from the golden age of British short stories and some from a Oscar Wilde collection. I will tell you briefly what each story is about and one thing that stands out to me. I read a few by Oscar Wilde because I was really intrigued by the contrast between The Picture of Dorian Gray, which is a novel, and The Importance of Being Earnest, which is a play. So I wanted to try a different format again, short story. The Sphinx Without a Secret is a conversation between 2 men discussing the mysterious lover of one of them and concluding that she was a sphinx without a secret. The narrator was shown a portrait of this woman and his friend asked him, "What do you think of this face? Is it truthful?" I find it a remarkable question. How do you decide what kind of face is truthful? And then I read The Nightingale and the Rose, The Happy Prince, The Selfish Giant, and The Devoted Friend. These are from The Happy Prince and Other Tales, a collection of children's stories. In my edition, there are some beautiful illustrations I want to show you. So here's one here. That's from The Nightingale and the Rose. And that one as well, from the same story. I find them very pretty. I am quite surprised by the Christian elements in these stories. There is a repeated theme of garden and paradise, for example. I'm not sure why I'm surprised by it, but I just keep getting surprised by Oscar Wilde. The short stories certainly feel different again to the novel and the play. Then I read The Argonauts of the Air by H.G. Wells from this collection. I misread the title at the beginning and I thought it said The Astronauts of the Air, and I thought that can't be right. So I searched Argonauts. The Argonauts, meaning Argo sailors, were a band of heroes in Greek mythology who in the years before the Trojan War accompanied Jason, whoever he is, in his quest to find the Golden Fleece. Their name comes from their ship, Argo. In addition to the Bible and Shakespeare, I think I need to add Greek mythology into my reading curriculum. They are referenced everywhere. The Argonauts of the Air is two men's attempt to build and fly a flying machine. I don't know if this was H.G. Wells' sci-fi attempt or if this was actually based in reality, because the first successful flying of a motor-operated airplane happened only 8 years after this story was written. The Awful Reason of the Vicar's Visit by G.K. Chesterton is from the Club of Queer Trades, a collection of stories. Each story is centered on a person who is making a living by some extraordinary and novel means. To be honest, The Awful Reason of the Vicar's Visit is the only short story from this month that I don't want to spoil for you. Chesterton has certainly outshone everyone this month with both this short story and the novel I mentioned earlier. Gabriel Earnest by Saki starts with, "There is a wild beast in your woods," said the artist Cunningham. There is indeed a wild beast in the wood near the narrator's house. I feel like you can dig quite deep into this story, even just from the tiny bit I just read for you. What's the meaning of the beast's name, Gabriel Earnest, and what's the significance that the narrator's friend who discovers this beast in the first place is an artist? You might have noticed that we have left the Victorian era a few short stories ago, and I certainly wasn't going to read The Prussian Officer by D.H. Lawrence, which was published in 1914. Until one day I reached the 2 chapters on sex in How to Read Literature Like a Professor, and D.H. Lawrence featured heavily. One point of the author is, when they are, as in the writers, when they are writing about other things, they really mean sex, and when they write about sex, they really mean something else. I was naturally curious to see if his theory proves true, and here is a fresh short story by Lawrence. What am I waiting for? And it turns out Forster is completely correct about sex in disguise, and this is what I meant when I said once your eyes are opened, you can't unsee certain things. Overall, this is an excellent collection. If you'd like to try some British short stories from its golden era, I'd highly recommend this one. This week marks my 1-year anniversary on BookTube. I've learned a lot along the way and I met a lot of you in the comment section. Thank you so much for being so kind in many ways. I'm going to make a video specifically to mark this occasion soon. If you've watched all the way till this point, first of all, thank you so much. And secondly, I'd love to hear your voices on the following 3 things. So first of all, do you have any questions for me about reading or about making videos for BookTube? I will try to answer them in my anniversary video. And secondly, was there a memorable video or type of videos of mine that you particularly enjoyed? So I can keep your preference in mind when I plan videos for the future. And thirdly, what would you like to see more next year? If you could answer just 1 or 2, that would be great as well. I would love to hear your opinions. If you are relatively new here, you can hear some of my personal stories in my newbie tag video. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in my next one.